Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the October 2024 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of Dizzy with Success concerning questions of the collective farm movement by Stalin from 1930. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon or buy me a coffee at patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. There are links to Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee in the video description. So we recently recorded an Intro to Anti-Trotskyism video for two playlists that we have on the channel, the Lenin Against Trotsky playlist and the General Anti-Trotskyism playlist. We're currently working on some longer videos for the Anti-Trotskyism playlist, including Kamenev's Leninism or Trotskyism and Stalin's Trotskyism or Leninism. In the meantime, I'm posting some shorter videos just to tide everyone over, including the one that I posted the other day on the final victory of socialism in the USSR. By Stalin from 1938. One of the things that I noticed in the response to that is there were several commenters who commented something along the lines that Stalin seemed to think that capitalist restoration could only occur due to external intervention, like an invasion or something like that. That's not the case at all, and I found it odd that so many people sort of had that impression. What you need to understand is that was 1938, so just a couple of years after the Moscow trials, basically the culmination of an enormous campaign to eradicate counter-revolution internally in the country. So that led Stalin to conclude that socialism had been built in the main in the country, and that the initial immediate wave of counter-revolution and that danger of restoration from within had been defeated. So, those first 2 decades since the revolution, there was a lot of struggle. There were a lot of ups and downs. The NEP was a huge gamble that Lenin didn't see any other way out than doing that in terms of trying to rebuild industry and just keep everything running after almost a decade of World War I and then the Civil War. That was a pivotal time. Lenin felt that this was really going to be a huge trial by fire in terms of what's going to come out of the NEP. Is it going to be capitalism or is it going to be socialism? And in fact, they only ran the NEP from 22 to 28 because the capitalists that were coming out of the NEP were hugely counter-revolutionary. So they had to really just put the brake on in 1928 and then start a huge collectivization campaign. Basically like a second revolution, because if they let the NEP go on any further, they might not be able to recover. So Stalin was keenly aware of the need to combat bourgeois influence so as to avoid capitalist restoration. He was very much on top of that. But I think that because Stalin's struggles against Trotsky and Bukharin, etc., often get painted in terms of Stalin wanted power, people forget that he was trying to prevent capitalist restoration. So no, he was very much aware that that is a threat from within. He just felt that at the time of that peace in 1938, they had basically conquered it, at least for the time being. Of course, revisionism, which is bourgeois ideas entering the communist vanguard, would rear its head in a major way in the 50s with Khrushchev, but, that was almost 2 decades away. If you're interested in this topic, I would recommend Foundations of Leninism. We have that on the channel. The Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR. We haven't done that one yet. Dialectical and Historical Materialism. We do have that one. The Report to the 17th Congress of the CPSUB. On the Draft Constitution of the USSR, and then various speeches from the purges and trials of the 1930s, where this was basically the main topic. Stalin addresses the topics of factionalism, running the party correctly, sabotage, ideological deviations, etc., and also bridging the gap of the internal and external forces. Of course, the external forces may invade if they can, and that will lead to capitalist restoration, but they may also aid and give funding to internal saboteurs and other covert agents of counter-revolution. So yeah, Stalin was actually super aware of that. Some people have said, too aware, like accusations of being paranoid and whatever, but the reality is everybody was out to put the territory of the USSR, all its resources and labor, back on the international capitalist market. So, the phrase justifiably paranoid is a contradiction in terms, but if there ever was anyone who really was justifiably paranoid, well, really the whole world was out to get Stalin. And it seems like very little has changed to this day in that respect. I don't know how many times I've read comments from people like, wow, all I've ever heard about Stalin is that he's this, brutal red fascist thug. But then you read his writings, he's a committed socialist, clearly. But anyway, I thought that this would be a good reading because it does address internal factors that can lead to capitalist restoration, such as ideological laxness. And that's where this piece comes in. So it was first published in Pravda number 60, March 2nd, 1930. The source is J.V. Stalin, Works, Volume 12, Foreign Languages Publishing House, Moscow, 1955. And the HTML transcription was done by Kenneth Higham and Mike B. for the Marxists Internet Archive, marxists.org. Let's begin. The Soviet government's successes in the sphere of the collective farm movement are now being spoken of by everyone. Even our enemies are forced to admit that the successes are substantial, and they really are very great. It is a fact that by February 20 of this year, 50% of the peasant farms throughout the USSR had been collectivized. That means that by February 20, 1930, we had overfulfilled the 5-year plan of collectivization by more than 100%. It is a fact that on February 28 of this year, the collective farms had already succeeded in stocking upwards of 36 million centners, i.e., about 220 million poods of seed for the spring sowing, which is more than 90% of the plan. It must be admitted that the accumulation of 22 million poods of seed by the collective farms alone, after the successful fulfillment of the grain procurement plan, is a tremendous achievement. What does all this show? That a radical turn of the countryside toward socialism may be considered as already achieved. There is no need to prove that these successes are of supreme importance for the fate of our country, for the whole of the working class, which is the directing force of our country, and lastly, for the party itself. To say nothing of the direct practical results, these successes are of immense value for the internal life of the party itself, for the education of our party. They imbue our party with a spirit of cheerfulness and confidence in its strength. They arm the working class with confidence in the victory of our cause. They bring forward additional millions of reserves for our party. Hence, the party's task is to consolidate the successes achieved and to utilize them systematically for our further advancement. But the successes have their seamy side, especially when they're attained with comparative ease, unexpectedly, so to speak. Such successes sometimes induce a spirit of vanity and conceit. We can achieve anything. There's nothing we can't do. People not infrequently become intoxicated by such successes. They become dizzy with success, lose all sense of proportion and the capacity to understand realities. They show a tendency to overrate their own strength and to underrate the strength of the enemy. Adventurous attempts are made to solve all questions of socialist construction in a trice, or very quickly. In such a case, there's no room for concern to consolidate the successes achieved and to utilize them systematically for further advancement. Why should we consolidate the successes achieved when, as it is, we can dash to the full victory of socialism in a trice? I guess Khrushchev never read this one. We can achieve anything. There's nothing we can't do. Hence, the party's task is to wage a determined struggle against these sentiments, which are dangerous and harmful to our cause, and to drive them out of the party. It cannot be said that these dangerous and harmful sentiments are widespread in the ranks of the party, but they do exist in our party, and there are no grounds for asserting that they won't become stronger. And if they should be allowed free scope, there can be no doubt that the collective farm movement will be considerably weakened, and the danger of its breaking down may become a reality. Hence, the task of our press is systematically to denounce these and similar anti-Leninist sentiments. A few facts. 1. The successes of our collective farm policy are due, among other things, to the fact that it rests on the voluntary character of the collective farm movement and on taking into account the diversity of conditions in the various regions of the USSR. Collective farms must not be established by force. That would be foolish and reactionary. The collective farm movement must rest on the active support of the main mass of the peasantry. Examples of the formation of collective farms in the developed areas must not be mechanically transplanted to underdeveloped areas. That would be foolish and reactionary. Such a, quote, policy would discredit the collectivization idea at one stroke. In determining the speed and methods of collective farm development, careful consideration must be given to the diversity of conditions in the various regions of the USSR. Our grain-growing areas are ahead of all others in the collective farm movement. Why is this? Firstly, because in these areas we have the largest number of already firmly established state farms and collective farms, thanks to which the peasants have had the opportunity to convince themselves of the power and importance of the new technical equipment, of the power and importance of the new collective organization of farming. Secondly, because these areas have had 2 years' schooling in the fight against the kulaks, or the rich peasants, during the grain procurement campaigns, and this could not but facilitate the development of the collective farm movement. Lastly, because these areas in recent years have been extensively supplied with the best cadres from the industrial centers. Can it be said that these especially favorable conditions also exist in other areas, the consuming areas, for example? such as our northern regions or in areas where there are still backward nationalities, such as Turkestan, say? No, it cannot be said. Clearly, the principle of taking into account the diversity of conditions in the various regions of the USSR is, together with the voluntary principle, one of the most important prerequisites for a sound collective farm movement. But what actually happens sometimes? Can it be said that the voluntary principle and the principle of taking local peculiarities into account are not violated in a number of areas? No, that cannot be said, unfortunately. We know, for example, that in a number of the northern areas of the consuming zone, where the conditions for the immediate organization of collective farms are comparatively less favorable than in the grain-growing areas, attempts are not infrequently made to replace preparatory work for the organization of collective farms by bureaucratic decreeing of the collective farm movement, paper resolutions on the growth of collective farms, organization of collective farms on paper, collective farms which have as yet no reality but whose existence is proclaimed in a heap of boastful resolutions. Or take certain areas in Turkestan, where conditions for the immediate organization of collective farms are even less favorable than in the northern regions of the consuming zone. We know that in a number of areas of Turkestan, there have already been attempts to overtake and outstrip the advanced areas of the USSR by threatening to use armed force, by threatening that peasants who are not yet ready to join the collective farms will be deprived of irrigation water and manufactured goods. What can there be in common between the Sergeant Prashibiev policy and the party's policy of relying on the voluntary principle and of taking local peculiarities into account in collective farm development? Clearly, there is not and cannot be anything in common between them. Who benefits by these distortions, this bureaucratic decreeing of the collective farm movement, these unworthy threats against the peasants? Nobody except our enemies. What may these distortions lead to? To strengthening our enemies and to discrediting the idea of the collective farm movement. Is it not clear that the authors of these distortions, who imagine themselves to be leftists, are in reality bringing grist to the mill of right opportunism? 2. One of the greatest merits of our party's political strategy is that it is able at any given moment to pick out the main link in the movement, by grasping which the party draws the whole chain toward one common goal in order to achieve the solution of the problem. Can it be said that the party has already picked out the main link of the collective farm movement in the system of collective farm development? Yes, this can and should be said. What is this chief link? Is it perhaps association for joint cultivation of the land? No, it is not that. Associations for the joint cultivation of the land, in which the means of production are not yet socialized, are already a past stage of the collective farm movement. Is it perhaps the agricultural commune? No, it is not that. Communes are still of isolated occurrence in the collective farm movement. The conditions are not yet ripe for agricultural communes, in which not only production, but also distribution is socialized to be the predominant form. The main link of the collective farm movement, its predominant form at the present moment, the link which has to be grasped now, is the agricultural artel. In the agricultural artel, the basic means of production, primarily for grain farming, labor, use of the land, machines and other implements, draft animals, and farm buildings are socialized. In the artel, the household plots, small vegetable gardens, small orchards, the dwelling houses, a part of the dairy cattle, small livestock, poultry, etc., are not socialized. The artel is the main link of the collective farm movement because it is the form best adapted for solving the grain problem, and the grain problem is the main link in the whole system of agriculture because, if it is not solved, it will be impossible to solve either the problem of stock breeding, small and large, or the problem of the industrial and special crops that provide the principal raw materials for industry. That is why the agricultural artel is the main link in the system of the collective farm movement at the present moment. That is the point of departure of the model rules for collective farms, the final text of which is published today in Pravda. And that should be the point of departure of our party and Soviet workers, one of whose duties is to make a thorough study of these rules and carry them out down to the last detail. Such is the line of the party at the present moment. Can it be said that this line of the party is being carried out without violation or distortion? No, it cannot, unfortunately. We know that in a number of areas of the USSR, where the struggle for the existence of the collective farms is still far from over, and where artels are not yet consolidated, attempts are being made to skip the artel framework and to leap straight away into the agricultural commune. The artel is still not consolidated, but they are already, quote, socializing dwelling houses, small livestock, and poultry. Moreover, this socialization is degenerating into bureaucratic decreeing on paper because the conditions which would make such socialization necessary do not yet exist. One might think that the grain problem has already been solved in the collective farms, that it is already a past stage, that the principal task at the present moment is not the solution of the grain problem, but solution of the problem of livestock and poultry breeding. Who, we may ask, benefits from this blockheaded work of lumping together different forms of the collective farm movement? Who benefits from this running too far ahead, which is stupid and harmful to our cause, irritating the collective farm peasant by, quote, socializing dwelling houses, all dairy cattle, all small livestock and poultry, when the grain problem is still unsolved, when the artel form of collective farming is not yet consolidated? Is it not obvious that such a policy can be to the satisfaction and advantage only of our sworn enemies? One such overzealous socializer even goes so far as to issue an order to an artel containing the following instructions, quote, within 3 days, register all the poultry of every household, establish posts of special commanders for registration and supervision, occupy the key positions in the artel, command the socialist battle without quitting your posts, and, of course, get a tight grip on the whole life of the artel. What is this? A policy of directing the collective farms, or a policy of disrupting and discrediting them? I say nothing of those revolutionaries, save the mark, who begin the work of organizing artels by removing the bells from the churches. Just imagine removing the church bells. How revolutionary. How could there have arisen in our midst such blockheaded exercises in, quote, socialization? Such ludicrous attempts to overleap oneself, attempts which aim at bypassing classes and the class struggle, and which in fact bring grist to the mill of our class enemies. They could have arisen only in the atmosphere of our easy and unexpected successes on the front of collective farm development. They could have arisen only as a result of the blockheaded belief of a section of our party, we can achieve anything, there's nothing we can't do. They could have arisen only because some of our comrades have become dizzy with success and for the moment have lost clearness of mind and sobriety of vision. To correct the line of our work in the sphere of collective farm development, we must put an end to these sentiments. That is now one of the immediate tasks of the party. The art of leadership is a serious matter. One must not lag behind the movement, because to do so is to lose contact with the masses. But neither must one run too far ahead, because to run too far ahead is to lose the masses and to isolate oneself. He who wants to lead a movement and at the same time keep in touch with the vast masses must wage a fight on two fronts, against those who lag behind and against those who run too far ahead. Our party is strong and invincible because, when leading a movement, it is able to preserve and multiply its contacts with the vast masses of the workers and peasants. J. Stalin. All right, and that's the end of the audiobook. So I think that this was pretty clear. This is kind of a well-known text by Stalin, and it's because it has sound advice. In other words, you want to keep moving forward really as rapidly as possible, but you can only do now what you can actually do now. In other words, what will actually land now. Socialist leadership does mean leading people towards liberation, but it doesn't mean pulling them so hard that you yank their arms off. That's not going to win you political points with anyone. On the other hand, you can't be too inactive because then there's no progress. And then people go, what good is your leadership? Nothing's really changed. That can lead to conditions growing stagnant, and it can open the door to counter-revolutionary forces. So this is a question of taking the temperature frequently to assess how much change you can actually get away with at any particular time. No matter how much success you've had in the past, you've got to stay level. Otherwise, you risk making missteps that could jeopardize everything. All right, we're going to leave it there. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below, and we will continue the discussion there as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. You can make a one-time donation or a recurring donation. All that support is encouraging. It's also materially helpful, and it allows me to spend more time on this channel than I'd be able to do without it. So if you like this channel, thank me, but also thank a patron or Buy Me a Coffee supporter and consider becoming one yourself. Beyond that, engagement counts, so like, share, subscribe. And remember that we can do a lot of agitating and educating online, but organizing happens in real life. So connect with your local left, get to know them, let them get to know you, network with people, and find out how you can get involved in the class struggle where you live. Take what you've learned here and apply it in real life. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.